I've buried 3 good horses and 1 good wife on this mountain, and I never once cried where a man could see me do it. So when I tell you a stranger came up our road one cold night with everything she owned in a busted suitcase, and a wedding dress she'd never wear, and that she cracked something loose in me that 40 years of weather never could, you can believe I don't say it easy. Her name was Della. She showed up at the wrong gate on the worst night of her life, and the man who opened it was the last man in this valley anyone thought had a soft place left in him. I watched the whole thing, every stubborn, foolish, unbearable minute of it, and I'm going to tell it to you the way it happened, not the way the town tells it now, all smoothed over and pretty, because the truth is better, and the truth is that I almost missed the most important thing I ever saw, on account of I was too busy pretending it was none of my business. Stay with me. By the end you'll understand why an old man keeps a photograph of a woman who was never his to keep. That's the thing about being old on a mountain. Your ears quit before the dogs do, so you learn to read the dogs instead. 2 short barks from Copper meant a deer at the fence line. 1 long low grumble from the old bitch, Sue, meant something on 2 legs that didn't belong. That night it was Sue, and it was after 11, and the sleet had turned the yard to black glass, so I set down my coffee and my tally book and went to the window with my knees complaining the whole way. Headlights at the gate, not coming through it, just sitting there, throwing 2 dirty cones of light into the sleet, going nowhere. I want to be honest with you from the start, because I've heard how the town tells this now, and it makes me want to spit. They say Elias Kane saw her broke down in the storm and rode down like something out of a picture show to save her. That's a lie, and it's a lazy one. What happened was, that car sat at our gate for the better part of 20 minutes with nobody in it moving, and I was the one who saw it, and I was the one who almost didn't go out. I'm not proud of that. I was warm. I was tired in the particular way a man gets tired at 68, where the tired lives in your bones instead of your muscles and no amount of sleep touches it. And I'd learned a long time ago that trouble that parks itself at your gate at 11 at night is usually trouble you invited, one way or another, and I hadn't invited any. So I stood there arguing with myself, watching those headlights, telling myself she'd turn around any minute. Somebody lost. Somebody drunk. Somebody who'd punch the wrong address into their phone and figure it out. She didn't turn around. The lights went dark, and the lights going dark, not the lights coming on, that's what got me into my coat, because a lost person keeps their lights on. A person who's given up turns them off. I pulled on Elia's spare oilskin off the peg by the mudroom door, the big one, and I went out into it. The cold up here isn't the cold you know. It's a wet, reaching cold that gets under a man's collar and takes hold of the little bones in his neck. I've felt it my whole life and I still hate it. I went down the drive with a flashlight I'd forgotten to change the batteries in, so it gave off about as much light as a lit cigarette, and I got to the car and I knocked on the window with 2 knuckles. Nothing. I knocked again and put the dying flashlight up to the glass, and there she was. She had her forehead down on the steering wheel and her hands folded in her lap, real neat, the way you'd fold a child's hands, and for one long terrible second I thought I was looking at a dead woman. I've seen dead ones. My Ruth at the end had that same stillness. So my heart went up into my throat and I hit the glass harder than I meant to, and she came up out of it with a gasp I could hear through the door, both hands flying to her chest. She looked at me. I looked at her. We were 2 frightened people separated by a 1/4 inch of glass, and I imagine I looked about as trustworthy as a fence post in that oilskin 3 sizes too big, with a dead flashlight and a face like a boot. "You all right?" I hollered. Stupid question. Nobody who's all right is folded over a steering wheel at their car's funeral. She rolled the window down about 2 inches. Cost her something to do it. I could see that, the way you can see a thing costs a person. Up close she was younger than I'd figured. 30, maybe. Dark hair come loose from whatever it had started the day as. And she'd been crying so long and so hard that her face had gone past red into that raw pink you see on a newborn calf, and her eyes were nearly swollen shut with it. "I'm sorry," she said, first words. Not help me, not who are you. She said I'm sorry, and I have thought about that 1,000 times since, because that's the whole of her right there in 2 words. She was at the bottom of the deepest hole a person can dig, and her first instinct was to apologize for being in it. "I'm sorry, I'll move. I didn't mean to stop here, I couldn't see any more, the road. I couldn't see the road." "Couldn't see it 'cause of the sleet, or couldn't see it 'cause of the crying?" I asked. She let out a sound that was half a laugh and half something breaking. "Both," she said. "I think both." Now I'm going to tell you what I noticed, because noticing is the only thing I've ever been any good at. Ruth used to say I could tell you the color of a stranger's socks a week after I met them, but I couldn't remember our anniversary to save my soul, and she wasn't wrong, God rest her. So I noticed. On the passenger seat, folded careful under a clear plastic bag, was a dress. White. The kind of white that's got a name, ivory or eggshell or some such, the kind of white that costs money. And on top of the dress, sitting there like a stone somebody'd set on a grave, was a ring box. Open, empty. And in the back seat, everything else. A whole life crammed into a car in a hurry. Boxes and bags and a lamp with no shade and a coffee maker with the cord wound around it, and a framed photo face down so I couldn't see who was in it. The particular archaeology of a person who's left somewhere fast and isn't going back. I've packed a car like that exactly once in my life, so I knew what I was looking at. "You got somewhere to be?" I asked her. She opened her mouth, closed it, and that was the answer, wasn't it? That closed mouth was the whole answer. "No," she said finally, quiet. "No, I don't." Here's where the town's version has Elia's appearing. Doesn't happen. What happens is, I stood out there in the sleet with an old man's knees, and I made a decision I had no business making, because it wasn't my gate and it wasn't my house, and Elias Kane was not a man who welcomed surprises, least of all surprises with wedding dresses in them. "Well," I said, "you can't sit out here. You'll freeze or you'll fall asleep and roll down into the creek, and then I'll have to fish you out in the morning, and I'm too old for that. Come up to the house. There's a fire and there's coffee and there's a couch nobody's used in 10 years. In the morning you can figure out the rest of your life. Tonight you just need to be warm." She stared at me like I'd offered her something in a foreign language. "I don't even know you," she said. "No," I agreed. "And I don't know you, that makes us even. Name's Dutch. I run this place for the man who owns it. Now are you coming, or am I standing out here till my last good knee gives out?" She came. I'll skip ahead a little, because the getting her inside part is just an old man and a young woman fumbling boxes in the sleet, and it isn't worth your time. The part worth your time is Elia's. Elias Kane owned the biggest spread in 3 counties. The Ironwood, 6,000 acres of high timber and pasture that his granddad had clawed out of the mountain, and his father had damn near drunk into the ground, and Elias himself had built back into something that made the bankers in town tip their hats. He owned the mill too, and a stake in the lumber outfit. And if you wanted to know exactly how much Elias Kane was worth, you could ask half the valley and they'd all give you a different number, and they'd all be guessing. Because the man never spent a nickel, he didn't have to, and never told a living soul his business. He was 44 that year, big through the shoulders in the way of men who have done real work their whole lives, gone a little gray at the temples, with a face that had one expression, which was no. His wife had died 6 years before, Marguerite, a delicate sort of woman who never took to the mountain, and there's a story there too, but it isn't mine to tell tonight. Since then he'd closed up like a house in winter, shutters drawn, nobody home. He worked, he ate, he slept, and he was decent to his men in a flat, distant way. And I'd worked for him 19 years, and I could count on one hand the times I'd heard him laugh. So when he came down the stairs at midnight in his sock feet, drawn by the noise, and found me and a strange weeping woman dripping sleet all over his mother's rug, you can imagine his face didn't do anything friendly. "Dutch," he said, "just my name." But the way he said it had a whole paragraph in it, and the paragraph said, "What in the hell?" "Found her at the gate," I said. Car's done, she's got nowhere, I put her on the couch. He looked at her. She looked at the floor. She'd stopped crying, but she had the wrung-out look of a person who's cried themselves empty, and she stood there in the middle of that big cold room hugging her own elbows like she was trying to make herself smaller, small enough to disappear. "I'll go," she said to the floor. "I'm sorry. Your man was kind, but I shouldn't have. I'll go in the morning, first light. You won't even." "Where?" Elias said. She looked up. "Where will you go?" he said, not gentle, just direct, the way he was about everything. "First light, you said. Where?" And she didn't have an answer, again. That same closed mouth. And I watched Elias Kane watch her not have an answer, and I watched something move behind his face. Just a flicker, just the shutters shifting an inch. Because whatever else he was, the man knew what it looked like when somebody had run out of road. He'd been close to it himself once, back when his father was drinking the ranch away. He knew. "There's a fire in the couch room," he said finally. "Dutch'll get you blankets, we'll talk in the morning." And he turned to go back up the stairs, and then he stopped with his hand on the rail, and without turning around he said, "You don't have to be sorry. Whatever you're being sorry for, not in this house." Then he went up, and that was the most words I'd heard the man string together since the funeral. Her name was Della Marsh. I got that much over coffee the next morning, before the sun was properly up, while Elias was out in the cold seeing to the stock, and it was just the two of us in the big kitchen with the frost still white on the windows. She was better in the daylight, not good but better, the way a wound looks better once it's been cleaned, even if it's still a wound. She'd slept, or something like it. She'd washed her face. And she had that carefulness about her again, that folded hands neatness, like she was a guest in her own body and didn't want to leave a mark. I didn't ask her anything. I've found that's the fastest way to learn a thing. Don't ask. Just pour the coffee and wait. People will tell you their whole life if you just leave a quiet space open long enough for it to fall into. And she did. She'd been going to get married. That much I'd figured from the dress. The man was Royce Vantry, and if that name means nothing to you, it meant plenty in our valley, because the Vantrys were the other kind of rich, not Elias kind, the calloused, close-fisted, earned kind, but the smooth kind, the kind that comes wrapped in 3 generations of it, the kind that has a name on a bank building. Royce was going to inherit all of it. And Della had met him 2 years back when she was waiting tables in the town below the mountain, and he'd swept her up the way that kind of man sweeps a pretty waitress up. And she'd moved into the Vantry guest house, and there'd been a ring, and there'd been a date set, and there'd been that dress in the plastic bag. And then, 11 days before the wedding, Royce had sat her down and explained to her, kindly, she said, and I could hear how much that kindly cost her, that it wasn't going to work, that his mother had never approved, that the family had made some things clear about the will, about what would happen to his inheritance if he married outside expectations, and that he'd thought about it long and hard, and he just couldn't do that to his future, and surely she understood. And then this is the part that turned my stomach, and I've got a strong stomach. The family had given her 3 days to be out of the guest house. Not Royce. Royce couldn't face it. The family's lawyer had come with the papers. 3 days. Because technically the guest house was Vantry property, and technically she had no claim to it, and technically. And her old job was gone. She'd quit it when she got engaged, the way you do, thinking you were stepping up into a new life. And her people were back east, and there'd been a falling out years ago that I didn't press on. And so on the 3rd day she'd packed her car with everything she owned in the world, and she'd driven up the mountain to get above it all, just to breathe, just to think. And the sleet had come, and she couldn't see the road, and she'd stopped at the first gate she came to. "Hours. I keep thinking there's something I should have done," she said, turning her coffee cup around and around on the table without drinking from it. "Some way I should have seen it coming. Everybody in town knew what the Vantrys were, everybody but me. I keep going back through it looking for the sign I missed. Because if I missed a sign, then it's my fault, and if it's my fault, then at least it means something, you know. At least I did something wrong. It's worse if I didn't." It's worse if I did everything right and it just, she stopped. I'm sorry, you don't want to hear all this. I'm still sitting here, I pointed out. She almost smiled. First when I saw out of her, it didn't last, but it was there. You are, she said. Elias came in then, stamping the cold off his boots, and the kitchen went quiet the way a kitchen does when the man of the house walks in and nobody knows quite where they stand. He poured himself coffee. He leaned against the counter. He looked at Della for a good long moment, and then he said the thing that decided the next year of all our lives, and he said it like he was talking about the weather. You know how to work. Della blinked. I what? Work, he said. Your hands. Do they know how to do anything, or are they just for wearing rings? Now that was cruel, and it landed cruel, and I saw her flinch. But I've since come to understand that it wasn't cruelty, or it wasn't only cruelty. It was the only kindness the man knew how to offer. Elias Kane could not have handed her money. It would have shamed them both, and she'd have thrown it back at him and been right too. He couldn't have offered her pity. The man didn't have any, or had it so deep he couldn't reach it. But work he understood. Work was the one currency he trusted. And what he was offering her, in the only language he owned, was a door that wasn't charity. Della sat up straight. Something came into her spine that hadn't been there, and she looked Elias Kane dead in the eye, first time she'd looked anybody in the eye since the gate, and she said, I can outwork any man you've got, try me. I about choked on my coffee. Elias didn't smile, but something ticked at the corner of his mouth, some muscle that maybe used to know how. We'll see, he said. Dutch, find her something. And he took his coffee and walked out. I'll tell you the truth, I figured she'd last a week. I've seen a lot of people come up this mountain with something to prove, and I've seen the mountain take it out of them, one cold morning at a time. It's not romantic work, ranch work. It's frozen water troughs at 5 in the morning, and it's mucking stalls till your shoulders scream, and it's your fingers so cold you can't feel the wire you're stringing. And it's the same thing tomorrow, and the day after, and the one after that, world without end. Pretty waitress from the town below, soft-handed, heartbroken. I gave her a week, and I'd have given you good odds on less. She lasted the week, then she lasted the month. She was bad at it at first, real bad. She didn't know a halter from a hackamore, and she got kicked by a horse she'd walked up behind wrong, and she cried in the barn where she thought nobody could hear her, except I could, because noticing is the only thing I'm good at, remember. But she got up the next morning at 5 and she did it again. And she watched. Lord, that woman watched me, watched the hands, watched Elias. And whatever she saw she tried, and whatever she got wrong she got a little less wrong the next day. And I have spent my whole life around men who were born to this work and would tell you they earned everything they had. And not one of them ever worked as hard as that heartbroken woman worked that first winter, trying to earn a place at a table nobody had promised her. Endurance. That's the word for what she had. Not talent. She didn't have much talent. But she had a thing in her that would not lie down, and I have come to believe that's worth more than talent ever was. The town talked, of course. Town always talks. Word got down the mountain that the jilted Vantry girl was up at the Ironwood playing cowgirl, and there was plenty of ugly speculation about what exactly she was doing for Elias Kane in exchange for room and board, and none of it was fit to repeat, and all of it was wrong. I heard it in the feed store. I heard a man say something with a laugh in it, and I set down my sack of grain, and I told him if he said it again, I'd put his teeth in his pocket for him. And I'm 68, and he was 40, and he believed me, which tells you how it must have showed on my face. Because here's what was actually happening up on that mountain, and it wasn't anything you could put a dirty word to. It was too closed up, wounded people slowly forgetting to be afraid of each other. I watched it happen, and I don't think either of them knew it was happening. It was in the small things. It was Elias, who ate every meal alone in his study for 6 years, starting to eat in the kitchen. Not saying much. Just there. It was Della learning to make coffee the way he liked it, black and strong enough to stand a spoon in, and not saying anything about it either, just having it ready. It was the two of them out mending the north fence in April, and me watching from the ridge, and seeing him say something. I couldn't hear what, and seeing her laugh, really laugh, head back, and seeing him look at her laughing with an expression on his face that I hadn't seen on it since before Marguerite died. Like a man looking at a fire he'd forgotten was warm. I want to be careful here because I'm an old man and old men make everything into a love story, and it wasn't a love story yet. It was two people getting well. That's all it was that first spring. Two people who'd both had something taken out of them, discovering they could stand next to each other and the wound didn't hurt worse. That's not nothing. Sometimes that's the beginning of everything. But it wasn't a love story yet, and I'd be lying if I dressed it up as one before its time. There was one evening, though. Late spring. The light does a thing up here in late spring, right at dusk, where it comes low and gold through the pines and turns the whole yard the color of honey, and I'd stepped out on the bunkhouse porch to fill my pipe. And I saw Della sitting on the top rail of the corral fence, still in her work clothes, watching the light go, and I saw Elias come out of the barn and stop when he saw her, and I saw him almost turn around and go back in. That was his whole life right there in that almost. And then he didn't. He walked over instead, and he leaned on the fence next to her, not too close, and the two of them watched the light die together, and neither one said a word for the longest time. And then I heard her say, her voice carried in the still air, "I used to think getting left at the altar was the worst thing that could happen to a person." And Elias said, "It's not." And she said, "No, I'm starting to think it might have been the best." And he didn't say anything to that. But he didn't move away, either. And they sat there in the gold light, and I put my unlit pipe back in my pocket and went inside, because some things a man shouldn't watch, even a man whose only gift is watching. I thought that was the shape of it then. I thought I knew how this story went. Two broke people getting whole, and maybe in a year or two something more, and an old man on the sidelines glad of it. I was wrong. I'd forgotten about the Vantrees. Because 3 days after that evening on the fence, a car came up the mountain that I recognized. Long, black town car, the kind nobody on this mountain drives. And it came through our gate this time, right up to the house, and a man got out of it that I'd never met but knew on sight, the way you know a snake on sight. Smooth, easy, handsome in a soft-handed way, in clothes that cost more than my truck. Royce Vantree. And Della, coming out of the barn with a hay hook in her hand and dirt on her face and her hair tied back with a piece of baling twine, stopped dead in the middle of the yard when she saw him. And the hay hook fell out of her hand into the dust. And I heard her say one word, so quiet it was almost nothing, and the word was, "No." The hay hook lay in the dust between them for a long moment, and nobody moved to pick it up. I was up on the loading dock by the feed barn close enough to hear, far enough that neither of them was thinking about me. That's the best place to see a thing, close enough to hear, far enough to be forgotten. I've spent my life in that spot. Royce Vantree stood by his long black car with his hands in his pockets, easy as you please, and he looked at Della standing there in her filth and her twine and her work, and I watched him decide how to play it. You could see him decide. That was the thing about the man, everything was a decision, a play, an angle. He settled on rueful, on tender, on the boy who'd made a mistake. "Della," he said, "God, look at you." And he said it soft, like her state broke his heart, like the dirt on her face was a wound he'd caused and come to heal. "What have they had you doing up here?" "Living," she said. He smiled like she'd made a joke. "Can we talk? Somewhere." He glanced at me, at the barn, at the whole rough working world of the place like it was something that might get on his shoes. "Somewhere we can talk." "You've got a mouth," she said. "Talk." I want you to hear how her voice had changed. The woman who'd said "I'm sorry" through a 2-inch gap in a car window that first night. That woman would have gone somewhere quiet with him. Would have made herself small. Would have let him arrange the conversation the way he wanted it arranged. This woman, this twine and dirt woman with a season of 5 a.m. mornings in her spine, stood her ground in the middle of the yard, and made him say his piece in the open where the hands could hear it. So he said it, and I'll give the devil his due, he'd come prepared with a good one. His grandmother had died, he said, 2 months back, and it turned out he was so sorry he'd had no idea none his mother had kept it from him. It turned out the old woman had left the bulk of the Vantry fortune not to Royce direct but into a trust, and the trust had a condition on it, an old-fashioned condition, the kind of thing lawyers put in wills 100 years ago. Royce would inherit the whole of it, the bank building and the land and the name and the money, on one condition: that he be married by his 35th birthday, which was, Royce spread his hands, all rueful charm, 4 months away. So Della said flat. So I've been a fool, Royce said, and he took a step toward her and his voice went to velvet. I let them scare me. My mother, the lawyers, all that talk about expectations. I threw away the best thing in my life to protect an inheritance, and now it turns out the inheritance needs you anyway, needs us, needs what we had, and I've had 2 months to think about what a coward I was, and Della, I've come to make it right. All of it. The wedding, the house, everything you lost. I've come to make it right. He got the ring box out of his pocket, same one. The one I'd seen sitting empty on her car seat in the sleet, except it wasn't empty now. Come home, he said. Come home and let me make it right. And I stood up on that loading dock with my heart going like a hammer because I could see the whole trap of it. That was the cruelty of the man's play. It looked like everything she'd lost being handed back. The wedding, the security, vindication, Lord, the vindication, the whole town that had whispered about her getting to watch her ride back down the mountain of Vantry after all. And behind all of it, unspoken, the plain fact that she had nothing, a broke, borrowed life on a mountain that owed her nothing, a job that could end whenever the man who owned it decided it should, a future made of frozen troughs and other men's cattle. He was offering her the world, and he'd timed it, I understood, before she'd had the chance to build a world of her own worth turning it down for. Except he'd made one mistake. He'd told her about the trust. He'd had to, it was his reason for coming, it was the whole engine of it. But in telling her, he'd told her the truth about what she was to him, which was a condition. A box to check by his 35th birthday. He'd stood in that yard and told the woman he'd thrown out with 3 days' notice that he needed her back, and the reason he'd been able to give was money. I saw her hear it. I saw the exact second it landed. Married by 35, she said, or you lose it. That's not Della, that's not why. When's your birthday, Royce? He hesitated just a hair. October. October, she said, and you found out about the trust when? The hesitation was longer this time. 2 months ago, she answered for him, soft. You found out 2 months ago. And you thought about it, and you thought about it, and you waited until the clock got tight, and then you drove up a mountain you've never once set foot on to tell a woman you dumped that you love her. She bent down, picked the hay hook up out of the dust, not threatening, just it was hers and it had fallen, so she picked it up. You know what I did the day your lawyer gave me 3 days to get out? I sat in my car in that guest house driveway for 2 hours, couldn't drive, couldn't breathe. And I kept waiting for you to come out, just to look at me. You didn't even do that. You let the lawyer do it. You couldn't spare me a window, Royce. And now the clock's running on your grandmother's money and suddenly you can spare me a whole afternoon. I was a coward, he said. I told you that. I'm here too. You're here because you need a wife by October, she said, and I'm the cheapest one available. And that word cheapest, that's when Elias came out of the house. I hadn't seen him standing in the doorway. I don't know how long he'd been there. But he came down off the porch now, slow, the way he did everything, and he crossed the yard and he came to a stop a little behind Della and off to the side, close enough that it meant something and far enough that it wasn't a claim. He didn't touch her. He didn't say a word to Royce. He just came and stood in the vicinity of her, big and still and gray at the temples, and looked at the Vantry boy with that one expression his face knew how to make, the no, and let the silence do the work. Royce looked at him, sized him up, the worn coat, the calloused hands, the whole rough earned weight of the man. And I watched Royce make the mistake that soft-handed men always make about hard-handed ones. He decided Elias was a servant. "This is between me and my fiancée," Royce said. Della said. "This is a family matter," Royce said to Elias, in the tone you'd use on a man to move his truck. "If you'd give us the yard." Elias looked at him for a while. "It's my yard," he said, "that's all." Then to Della, not turning his head, "You want him here?" "No," Della said. "Then he's not here," Elias said. And he still hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved toward the man, hadn't done one single thing you could point to. But there was 6,000 acres and 40 years of hard weather standing in that yard, and Royce Vantry finally understood what he was looking at, and I watched the color go out of his easy, handsome face. But I'll say this for the snake. He had one more strike in him, and he aimed it true. He put the ring box back in his pocket, and he looked at Della, and he dropped the velvet, and what came out underneath was the thing that had been true all along. "You'll have nothing," he said. "Quiet now, mean now. You understand that. You turn this down, you've got nothing. No money, no name, no home. This isn't your home, you know that. You're the help. He'll get tired of you the way men get tired of a stray, and then where do you go? Back to waiting tables. Back east to the family that doesn't want you. I'm the last soft landing you're ever going to get, and you're standing in a filthy yard with a hay hook in your hand telling me no because your pride got wounded." He shook his head, slow, sorrowful, the picture of a reasonable man. "Take the ring, Della. Grow up. Take the ring and have a life, or stay here and shovel manure for a man who will never marry you until you're old and it's too late and you finally understand what you threw away." And it got quiet. And I'll tell you, God forgive me, I held my breath. Because he wasn't entirely wrong, was he? That was the horror of it. He wasn't lying about the shape of her situation. She did have nothing. It wasn't her home, not by any paper. Elias hadn't promised her a thing, not marriage, not a future, not even next month. And a life is a long thing to gamble on a season of good feeling and gold light through the pines. I've known plenty of people who took the safe cruelty over the risky kindness, and I've never been sure they chose wrong. Safe is safe. Safe keeps the sleet off. I was 68 years old, and I did not know, standing on that dock, what she was going to do, and I did not know what I'd have told her to do if she'd asked me. Della looked at the ring box in his pocket. She looked at it a long time, long enough that Royce's face started to relax, started to think it had worked. Then she said, "You're right." Royce's face opened up, triumph coming. "You're right that I've got nothing," Della said. "No money, no name, no paper that says I get to stay. You're right about all of it." She turned and she looked at Elias, looked at him direct, the way she'd looked at him across the kitchen the morning he asked if her hands knew how to work, and she said to Royce, but looking at Elias the whole time, "I've got a busted car and 2 hands that finally learned how to do something and a place on a mountain that could get taken away from me tomorrow. That's everything I've got in the world." She turned back to Royce. "And it's worth more than everything you're offering because I earned it and it's real and nobody handed it to me to check a box. You want to know what you taught me, Royce? You taught me the difference. I didn't know it before. Now I do. Now get off this man's yard." And Royce Vantry stood there with a fortune in his pocket he was going to lose in October, and he had nothing left to say, because you can't argue a person out of their own dignity once they've found it. He got in his long black car. He turned it around in the yard, too fast, throwing gravel. And he went down the mountain the way he'd come, and I never saw him again, and the last I heard he'd married some banker's daughter in a hurry that fall and got his money, and I hope it keeps him warm. Here's the part the town doesn't tell at all, because nobody but me was there for it. After the car was gone, the two of them stood in the yard a while not talking. The hands drifted off back to their work. I should have too. I didn't. I stayed up on my dock and I watched one last time because I had a feeling. And after a while Elias said, "I could just hear it. You could have had all that." "I know," Della said. "Money, the name, everything you lost." He was looking off at the mountains when he said it, not at her. I can't give you those, you understand that. This place could go bad in a season, cattle prices, a bad winter, the mill. I've got no grandmother's trust. I've got debt and land and work, and I'm a hard man to live around. Everyone'll tell you that. It's the truest thing about me. He wasn't wrong what he said about what I've got to offer. He stopped, swallowed. And then Elias Kane, who I'd worked for 19 years and heard laugh maybe 4 times, said the bravest thing I ever heard a man say, and he said it staring at a mountain because he couldn't say it to her face. I don't want you to stay because you've got nowhere else. I'd rather you had somewhere else and stayed anyway. So if you need to go find your somewhere else first so you can come back knowing, I'd wait. I'd wait on that. And Della was quiet for a spell. Then she said, Elias. He looked at her. I did find somewhere else, she said. It's here. I found it in February mucking stalls, freezing half to death, the morning I realized I'd stopped waiting to feel better and just started living. It was here the whole time. I don't need to go looking for it. She wiped her face with the back of her dirty hand and left a streak on her cheek and didn't care. I'm not staying because I've got nowhere. I'm staying because out of everywhere in the whole world, this is the place I'd choose. Do you understand the difference? It's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing he never understood. I'm choosing it. I'm choosing you. And Elias Kane didn't say anything. But I watched that big, closed-up, shuttered man reach out one weathered hand and, careful as a person handling something they were afraid to break, wipe the dirt off her cheek with his thumb. And I watched him leave his hand there on the side of her face. And I watched her lean her head into it, into his rough hand, with her eyes closed in the gold light, in the middle of a filthy working yard that neither one of them owned free and clear, and neither one of them would have traded for the whole Vantry fortune. And I got down off my dock and I went inside, because some things a man shouldn't watch. They married that fall, right about the time Royce was marrying his banker's daughter down in the valley, as it happened, though nobody up here paid that any mind. Small thing, the wedding. Just the hands and a few neighbors and a preacher who came up the mountain, and Della wore a plain dress, blue, not the ivory one. She'd given that one away months before. Somebody in town, some girl who needed a dress and couldn't afford one. Della never said who. That was like her. I gave her away. She asked me to. Old man with knees that don't work and one gift which is noticing, and she asked me because I was the one who went out into the sleet that night when I could have stayed warm, and she never forgot it, and she said so, standing in the barn we'd cleared out and hung with lanterns before she took my arm. You didn't have to come out to that gate, she said. You almost didn't, I could tell, and you did anyway. She squeezed my arm. That's the whole thing, Dutch. That's the whole story. Somebody almost doesn't and then they do. I've thought about that a lot since. She's got 2 little ones now, up at the Ironwood, and the place has had good years and hard ones just like Elias promised, and she works as hard as she ever did, and the town that whispered about her calls her Mrs. Kane now, and half of them have forgotten there was ever another story. But I remember. And Elias laughs now, laughs often, which I never in my life thought I'd live to hear. And there's a photograph on my wall in the bunkhouse of the 3 of us the day of the wedding, Della in her blue dress in the middle with an arm around each of us. Me and Elias, the 2 hardest, most shut-up men on the mountain, both of us cracked open by the same stubborn, heartbroken woman who showed up at the wrong gate on the worst night of her life. People ask me sometimes why an old bachelor keeps a picture of another man's wife on his wall. I tell them she's the reason I know it was never too late. Not for Elias, not for me, not for anybody who thinks the door's closed for good. They don't usually understand what I mean by that. That's all right. Some things you have to go out into the sleet to learn. I keep the flashlight by the door now, new batteries in it, every night I check.